This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you for joining us for the Carriage Association of America's Friday night webinar series. It's my pleasure to introduce Jerry Bowman, who is the curator of the Northwest Carriage Museum. He and his wife, Lori, have run the museum for the past 16 years, growing the collection from 21 to 58 horse-drawn vehicles. Jerry is a retired data processing executive and many years ago taught history and math in Southern California. Over the years, Jerry has been a restorer of antiques, cars, and buildings. His passion today is restoration and conservation of 19th century horse-drawn vehicles and their respective histories. Jerry and Lori retired to the Willapa Harbor area 17 years ago. They are known throughout the area for their volunteer community work and for making Raymond a destination stop for many travelers to the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, Jerry, and go ahead.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. I appreciate that introduction. Hi, everybody. This is very exciting for us. The carriages at the Northwest Carriage Museum are my passion. I love our carriage collection and building our carriage collection. So I'm looking forward to spending some time with you this afternoon or this evening on your time, this afternoon on our time. And having some fun. So the Northwest Carriage Museum is in Raymond, Washington. Now, a lot of people don't know where Raymond, Washington is. Raymond is a small rural town in the southwest corner of the state of Washington. We are about 2.5 hours from Seattle. We're about 2.5 hours from Portland. And if any of you know where Astoria, Oregon is, right on the mouth of the Columbia River in the Pacific Ocean, we're about 45 miles on Highway 101, right up the coast from that. So our museum in our small town, Highway 101, travels right through our community, and we get lots of travelers going up to the Olympic Peninsula and down the Oregon coast. And we're, like I said, a small rural community. And this beautiful picture, this first picture, is our recent addition. We added, we were running out of room, so we added this addition. We lovingly call it the barn. You can see we have a loft in here. We added about a little under 5,000 square feet of display space, and this houses most of our family vehicles and our work-related vehicles, and we'll talk more about that here in a couple of slides. This is a picture of the outside of our new barn addition. Beautiful building. Let's see. Trying to go to my next slide here, Kathleen. Did I?
Use your arrow key.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Let's see. Why are we not getting it?
Okay, so make sure that the screen that
we'll try that.
Okay. There you go.
It's operating really slow. There we go. This picture is, well, we have a world-class collection of carriages, wagons, buggies, sleighs, work-related vehicles. This is the older part of our museum that opened in 2002. Beautiful wood floors, very elegant lighting. It houses many of our really elegant carriages. And let's see if we can get, there we go. Now it's moving a little quicker. I don't know if you guys are seeing the same screen I'm seeing right now.
Yes, just go ahead.
There it is. Our museum opened in 2002. Okay, our museum opened in 2002 with 21 vehicles, as Kathleen said, and we expanded and added that barn addition in 2015. We currently have 58 vehicles on display, a variety of different styles of vehicles, and number 59 is currently in my shop. We're working on an 1860 Boston Chase right now, and number 60 is in a carport all covered up. That'll be a summer project for us. So we're continuously adding to our number of vehicles in the museum, and we also have a number of various types of 19th century artifacts, clothing that offset our carriages. People love visiting our museum. They just love some of the attractions that we have, and we are very proud of the fact that we have become Pacific County's largest tourist attraction. Pacific County is a very rural county down out here in the southwest corner of the state of Washington. Give you some idea of our population and our geographic area. We are about the size of Rhode Island in terms of geographics. But unlike Rhode Island, who has about 1 million people, we have 24,000 in our entire county. We have a north section, which is Raymond and South Bend, houses probably about 4,000 people. And then we have a southern section, the Long Beach Peninsula, which is kind of a tourist area. And that's pretty close to Astoria, Oregon, over the big Megler Bridge. That's a 4.5-mile bridge that covers or goes over the Columbia River. We have, I'm not sure, Kathleen, if this is already changing or there it goes. Okay. The Northwest Carriage Museum, we have two fairly simple goals at the Carriage Museum. One is preserving these 19th century horse-drawn vehicles and their history. We love talking about them. We love sharing our collection with people. We do a lot of tours, but of equal importance, we are a very important and critical aspect of our local economy and our businesses. Our small rural town, like many small towns, lost a lot of people over the years, and we're trying to make a comeback right now. And the Northwest Carriage Museum draws 10 to 12,000 people a year to our area. And what we're proud of is that those people that visit our museum not only enjoy our museum, but they're eating in our restaurants and buying our gasoline and supporting the local community, restocking their RVs at our grocery stores. So we're a very important part of the local community, and our community loves us for that and has been very supportive. We are open every day, 363 days a year, from 10 to 4. And we have a very nice visitor center with all kinds of information regarding the things to do in the area. Lots of hiking trails, walking trails, kayaking, hunting, fishing, other museums. We are a nonprofit museum, a 501(c)(3) organization. We survive on admissions, donations, and members. We have a very nice membership base that we're very, very proud of. They've been very supportive of us over the years, several hundred people. And we have a gift shop that specializes in local products, pottery, jewelry, oysters, which I don't know if any of you know this, but we're very famous for lumbering up here as well as the oyster business. South Bend, the little town next to us, is considered to be the oyster capital of the world. When we do tours in the museum, I think I'm still playing a little catch up here, but when we do tours in the museum, we like to tell people that we want to step back in time and imagine if you're back in the 1890 period of time, and things were a little bit different back in those years. Men earned around $400 a year. Women oftentimes worked in family businesses and weren't drawing any type of salaries. And you could buy a nice carriage or a buggy for about $40 back in those days. A pair of jeans was under $1, about 98 cents for a pair of blue jeans, and a man's tailored suit you could purchase for a little under $4. So things were a little different. We like to share that with people because when we get into talking about you know, our carriages and the cost of the carriages, people are astounded at some of the pricing. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. The other thing we like to share with people is that back in the 1890 period of time, America was obviously a different place. Transportation was horse-based, and they say back in the 1890s there was about 25 million horses in our country. People that come into our museum are astounded by that number. Today, they say there's somewhere, I think, between 4.5 to 5 million horses in our country. And people are familiar with today's level of congestion in major towns and cities, but they don't realize that that same kind of congestion existed back in the 1890s, although it was a different type of congestion. There were thousands of buggies and delivery wagons and carriages and carts and horses on the streets of most of our major cities. Big towns like the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the Philadelphias, they were crowded places back in those days. And to be perfectly honest, it was more dangerous to ride in a horse-drawn vehicle back in those days than it is to ride in your automobile today. One of the statistics that I've heard is that in New York City, on any given day back in around the 1895 period of time, They estimate that there any 24-hour period there could be as many as 150 to 250,000 horses on the streets of New York City. So congestion was a different type of congestion back in those days. In our museum, we have a variety of styles of carriages, from elegant carriages to coaches to buggies. And the two beautiful vehicles on the top of this page, the blue and black one, that is our bowed front brougham. Our bowed front brougham was made by the Henry Killam Company out of New Haven, Connecticut. It still has all original glass. The rounded windows in front are just absolutely beautiful. And then on the right-hand corner is our landaulet, and this landaulet was actually made in London, England, back in the 1890 period of time by a company called the Carriage Company. Connaught is not necessarily a name that people are familiar with, but in later years, the early 1900s, the Connaught Carriage Company got in cahoots with Rolls-Royce, and the first Rolls-Royces that came off the production line in the early 1900s were called Connaughts by Rolls-Royce. A lot of the carriage makers and the trimmers, the people that put the upholstery into these carriages went on to work for Rolls-Royce. If you see on the door there, you'll see some white buttons there. This is a beautiful coach. Those are real ivory buttons on here. This particular carriage is a convertible. It breaks apart in the middle there, and the back section falls down, and you can actually lift those front windows out. Although we don't mess with it too much because it still has original glass in it, but it's an absolutely beautiful carriage. Down in the bottom left-hand corner is our Henderson Stagecoach. Our Henderson Stagecoach was made in Stockton, California in 1888, and I'm going to talk more about this one in a few slides, so we won't talk a lot about it right now, but it's a very interesting coach. We have kind of salvaged or saved the patina of this. It's not as elegantly finished as some of our beautiful coaches that I talked about earlier in the other part of our museum, but it draws a lot of attention, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. The bottom right-hand buggy is a Studebaker buggy. People that come into our museum know Studebaker from the name or from the car and automobile industry. They don't realize that the Studebaker company actually started in 1850 making wheelbarrows for the California Gold Rush. And a couple of the brothers, the German brothers, there was 4 of them, broke off, went to South Bend, Indiana, and started the Studebaker wagon and buggy business. And by the 1880 period of time, they were the largest producer of horse-drawn vehicles in the country. They were producing more than 100 vehicles a day, which was just incredible production back in those days. They used a process called systemization. A lot of people credit Henry Ford with automation, but Studebaker was using a process called systemization, where they built all the components of their various vehicles, wagons, buggies, elegant vehicles in different buildings, and brought them to centralized buildings on a scheduled basis for assemblers to put together. But they were churning out close to 100 a day, a remarkable company. I'm waiting for the slide to change here. There we go. These 2 beautiful vehicles are our C-Spring vehicles. We have a C-Spring dress Landau on top and a C-Spring Victoria down below. Our C-Spring Victoria, of course, was named after Queen Victoria of England, but the C-Spring carriages are just elegant and finely crafted carriages. Elliptical springs on each of the 4 wheels, an elaborate C-spring system that supports this wooden body, this beautifully crafted wooden body, basically suspending this wooden body on 4 leather straps. So these had very elegant rides in it. The C-Spring Victoria, it has kind of an interesting history. This particular carriage was once owned by 20th Century Fox. It's an original carriage from about 1900. But in the 1930s and 40s, it was owned by 20th Century Fox, and it was used in some movies. If any of you are familiar with the 1939 classic with Shirley Temple called Little Princess, the next time you watch that movie, watch for this carriage. You'll see it in that movie. It's just an absolutely beautiful carriage. Both of our C-Spring carriages were made in San Pedro, California by a company called Zentz Brothers. And Frank and John Zentz were carriage makers and later became car makers, but their biggest claim to fame was actually being a prop. They made props for in the heyday of Hollywood. And they were founded in 1898, but in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, they were primarily prop makers. They made the chariots for the Ben-Hur movie, and they also, if you watch the Rose Parade on January 1st from Pasadena, California, their royalty is oftentimes carried in some beautiful, beautiful handcrafted carriages. Those were all made by the Zentz brothers. Next carriages that are coming up is our summer coupe brougham. Waiting for it to change. There it is. Our summer coupe brougham. And down below is our Shelburne Landau. Our summer coupe brougham is actually a Brewster carriage. And Kathleen was nice enough to send me some information on our Brewster carriage. And this carriage was actually sold in 1905. And it was owned by this lovely lady right here. Her name is Grace Masery. The gentleman next to her is her husband, John Masery, and they have kind of an interesting story. John Masery owned the Masery Paint Company. He was in business with his first wife and two adult children, had a very successful paint company. They provided a lot of the paint for the carriage industry as well as the housing industry. But John and his first wife and his two adult children had a very successful business. They brought Grace over from Ireland to be their housekeeper. And in the late 1880s, John's first wife passed away, and he secretively married Grace. And they kept it a secret because back in those days, it was not appropriate for a man of wealth to marry the hired help. So they kept it a secret for 10 years. And in that 10-year period of time, they had two more children together. And when they broke the news back in New York, apparently it was scandalous. It was headlines of all the newspapers. Masery marries hired help. But John passed away in the late 1890s. Grace was 30 years younger than he was, and actually lived to be to about 1938. And this was one of her several carriages that she used on her upstate property in New York. The carriage down below is our Shelburne Landau, a beautiful, beautiful carriage, but we get a lot of advertising mileage out of this carriage. This brings in a lot of ladies who are old movie buffs. This particular carriage was once owned by the Hutkins Brothers Movie Ranch in Hollywood, California. Ace Hutkins and his brother, they had hundreds of carriages and horse-drawn vehicles that they used to lease out to the movie industry. And they also raised horses. They actually sold Trigger to Roy Rogers, and they had Silver from the Lone Ranger. But this particular carriage was used in the movie Gone with the Wind, and this was Belle Watling's carriage in Gone with the Wind. There's Belle right there in this particular carriage back in I think it was 1939 when they made the movie. This carriage was also used in a movie with Bette Davis called Jezebel, but a lot of people come into our museum, especially ladies who are old movie buffs, and they want to see the Gone with the Wind carriage and get their picture taken with it. Moving on to the next slide, and there's a little bit of a delay. Here we go. This is our turn under seat trap. It was made by the Stratton Company back in the 1890 period of time. They produced vehicles up until the early 1920s. This particular carriage is very unique. To my knowledge, we're the only carriage museum that has one on display from the Stratton Company. What was unique about this, and you can see their advertising over here, they sold this as a combination vehicle. They sold it as a runabout, which is this picture down here, and you can see it's a single seat buggy, but this front seat lifts up and forward, and this back piece lifts up to give you the trap back here. It was also could be fitted to be a rockaway, a surrey, a clash top trap. There was, I think they had 6 different combinations of it, and they were a unique company because when you bought one of these back in the day, they actually sold it to you in the white, and in the white means it was non-painted, so it wasn't finished with paint at that point. And then when you got it, you could take it to a local craftsman who could paint it to your liking. So that's how they sold theirs. It was a beautiful, beautiful vehicle. There we go. This is our Kimball Town Coach, another fantastic and incredibly crafted vehicle that we have in the museum. You guys are probably familiar with the Kimball Company. The Kimball family were 9 generations of carriage makers. They started off in Maine. They're actually credited with designing the Portland Cutter sleigh, but then they moved their business down to New York, eventually to Chicago, which is where most of their business was done. They had a 7-story building in Chicago where they produced these kind of vehicles. This particular one got kind of an interesting story. It was donated to us by another museum up in Seattle called MOHI, the Museum of History and Industry. And this was gifted to them in 1951 and never put on display until we got it about 5 or 6 years ago. We had to do some work on it, do some paint work on it and upholstery work on it, and fix this door on this side, but it just came out beautiful. But the interesting thing about it, we know the personal history of this vehicle. It was once owned by this gentleman right here. This is a guy by the name of FCA Dankman, and that's probably a name that you're not familiar with, but out here, it ties in nicely to some of our history. FCA Dankman was a grocer back in Illinois back in the late 19th century. And Dankman had a grocery store, a successful small grocery store in a small town. And he came home one day and he told his wife that there was a business opportunity in town that he thought that they should take advantage of. And she said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, there's a lumber mill in town for sale." And she said, "Well, go ahead and buy it." And he said, "Well, we don't have the cash flow to do that, but maybe maybe if we could get some backing." And she said, "Go to my brother." And he was reluctant to do that, but he eventually went to his brother-in-law and said, "Would you like to be a financial backer in this endeavor?" And he said, "Sure." Well, his brother-in-law happened to be a guy by the name of Frederick Weyerhaeuser. And I don't know how familiar you are with the Weyerhaeuser name. It's a big name out here in the Pacific Northwest, but they formed the Weyerhaeuser Dankman Lumber Company. That one lumber mill became 3 lumber mills within a year. And Dankman actually ran the business. Weyerhaeuser was just a financial backer. He broke away, came out west here and bought up most of Oregon and Washington, and eventually big parts of Canada, and now even in the southern states. So it's got kind of a unique history, but it's just an incredibly beautiful vehicle. There we go. This is our 1900 hearse from Vienna, Austria. This picture does not actually do it justice. This is a very, very large vehicle and a very, very heavy vehicle. But the scroll work on here, the craftsmanship of this, all hand carved scroll work down the sides here, there's flowers. It's just absolutely beautiful. The cross on top, the sconces on top, just a remarkable vehicle. This also has a unique story to it. It came over to America in a shipping container, apparently in the 1960s, and got sold to an antique store in Salt Lake City, Utah, who in turn sold it to a private party gentleman who took it to Park City, Utah, and parked it in his front yard in the rain and snow for 35 years and let it deteriorate and rot and just sitting out in his front yard in the snow. The gentleman that donated this to us, who we're still in contact with, he's 96 years old now. He actually drove by it all the time in Park City and felt bad for it. So he bought it off that guy and did what we would call today as a frame-off restoration. He couldn't do some of the wheel work on it. And some of you can see the new wood up here in front near the fifth wheel, and some of that wood. That was all done by our friend from Hanson Wheel over in South Dakota. But most of it, this gentleman did himself. And he, a few years back, he called me up one day and he said, "I'm an old guy and my kids don't want it. And I have a hearse that I'm thinking of giving to a museum." He was now up in Port Townsend, Washington, which is about 2.5 hours away from us. And he said, "I have this hearse and I'm thinking of giving it to a museum. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Send me a picture of it." And he sent me a picture of it and I told him, "I'll be up tomorrow." And it worked out pretty well for us. He comes and visits it periodically, but it's just an incredible vehicle. The other interesting thing about this vehicle is that when we got it, we had to do some minor things to it. But we were looking for a maker mark on it. We couldn't find anything. But on the axles in the springs in the back, we found a stamp that said Heinz Winter, and that's a name that I wasn't particularly familiar with. But we traced that down to a company in Vienna, Austria, who back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, made undercarriage parts for many of the finer companies over there. Well, we wrote to a curator of a museum over in Vienna, Austria, and she sent me this picture. This is a picture of the funeral procession of Archduke Ferdinand. He was assassinated in 1914, and that was the start of World War I. And their carriage, which is in a museum over in Vienna, their undercarriage was made by Heinz Winter. Their actual carriage was made by a company called the Imperial Coach Company. I highly suspect ours was made by the same company. You can see some very similar lines in it. I don't know that for 100%, but it's a great story, and we're very proud to have that vehicle. Moving ahead here, let's see. Little bit of a delay. This is our carved panel hearse. This is an American hearse. They actually called it a carved panel hearse because of the beautiful hand carving on the wood curtains and whatever. They also called it an 8-column hearse because there's 4 columns on each side. This particular hearse was made by Sayre and Scoville out of Ohio. They were very famous for not only their horse-drawn hearse, but they were also into the automobile hearse. And I believe they produced hearse up through about 1970 on Cadillac bodies, and then they got bought out by another company. The back of our hearse, this hearse is located in the back room of our museum. We usually end our tours back here. And I always ask a question of people back here. You see this little area where my cursor is underneath the coffin here? I don't know if you guys know what that little area is for. I always ask people that come through our museum, what would that have been used for? And we've heard, the most common answer is a ramp to get the coffin out, or some sort of poles to carry the coffin for the pallbearers. We've heard shovels, we've heard flowers, we've heard clothing, we've heard all kinds of things. But the real answer to that is they used to put ice in there to keep the interior compartment cool for obvious reasons. And so the saying that keep them on ice, that actually came from the horse-drawn hearse era. So when they say keep them on ice, they were putting ice in here to keep that compartment cool, to keep the smell down, to be perfectly honest. This is our hand-pulled funeral bier. It came out of Europe, came out of Germany specifically in the 1870s. This is a hand-pulled part, beautifully crafted. Rollers on top. All of the boards are dovetailed in. It's just absolutely beautiful. What's unique about this is you see that this has legs on each corner. Oop, I went 1, 2, let me go back here. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. This has legs on each corner, and then there's these handles that actually flip up. What this allows is that you could put a pallbearer on each end and pull these handles up, and there's a release here in the front and one in the back that you can pull out, and they could carry the hearse or the coffin into the church for the services, leave the wheels outside, and then when the service was over, bring it back out, and then wheel the coffin to the cemetery or to a horse-drawn hearse, if that was the case in some of the larger cities. We have a variety of sleighs in our museum. This is just a few of them. This is a town sleigh made by the Deere Weber Company out of Minneapolis. Town sleighs, excuse me, town sleighs are basically Portland cutters with springs on them. They were a little bit more elegant than a Portland cutter, a little bit more expensive back in the day. But this was made by the Deere Weber Company. Those of you that know the Deere Weber Company, you know that John Deere, this is from the John Deere Company. A lot of people know John Deere from the big excavating equipment and tractors that they make today. But John Deere started back in the 1850s. And his daughter, one of his daughters, actually married a gentleman by the name of Christopher Columbus Weber. And they formed the Deere Weber Company. They were noted for making sleighs and bobsleds and buggies. They actually, their company once owned the Reliance Buggy Company, which actually sold buggies out of Sears and Montgomery Ward catalogs. but they were out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. The one in the top right-hand corner is our beautiful Coachman sleigh, just beautifully restored. Artwork on the front and the back, just absolutely gorgeous vehicle. And then the one down on the bottom, this is our Portland cutter. This is actually made by the Cortland Cart and Carriage Company in the 1880s. Cortland was later known, when they were making automobiles, for making the first station wagon in 1916. They actually called it the Hatfield Suburban. They were out of New York and made a lot of different styles of buggies and sleighs. This particular sleigh also has all original paint and pinstriping on it. It's absolutely gorgeous and in marvelous condition. Let's see, here, there we go. These are, I tell people, these are kind of the family station wagons of the day. Of course, our Studebaker buggy, we talked about that already. Studebaker, the largest producer of horse-drawn vehicles. But our Surrey, I tell people, this is kind of the family station wagon of its day. You know, some of those real elegant carriages that I was showing you earlier, I like to tell people that for every one of those that was on the road back in those days, there were tens of thousands of these kind of vehicles, because this is what people could afford. Some of those nice C springs that I was showing you earlier back in 1895, those would have cost you $1,400, $1,500. You could have bought this Studebaker right here for about $45 to $50. And actually, you could have gotten it even cheaper if you wouldn't have got the top on it. This actually has leather upholstery on it. Those were all options back in those days. If you wouldn't have got the top and the leather seat on here, you probably could have taken $19, $20 off the price of this and bought it for about 25 bucks. Our Surrey down here, a lot of people that come into our museum, they know the Surrey name from the movie Oklahoma. In fact, some people come in and like to sing the song, but I have to break it to them that not all Surreys are fringe top. Not all Surreys had tops. Again, it was based on what you could afford. Our Surrey is actually set up kind of high end. It has a beautiful top on it, has leather upholstery, it has carriage lamps on it. This probably would have cost somewhere a little over $200 back in 1895, but you could have got the stripped down version, no top, wooden seats on it, whatever. You could have probably got the cost down to about 60 bucks back in those days. There we go. This is our beautiful handsome cab. The hansom cab was invented by a guy by the name of Joseph Hansom. He was a British architect back in 1834. Our cab is believed to be from about 1880. We believe it was made by the D.P. Nichols Company out of Boston. They were noted for their heavy commercial vehicles, went on to produce cars and trucks in the early 1900s. But our particular cab was used as a taxi cab in New York City Central Park back in right around the turn of the century. It's an absolutely beautiful vehicle. There we go. This is one of the cutest vehicles that we have in the museum. This is our 1880, 1890 mail buggy. It was made by the Hansford Wagon Work out of New York. It was part of the RFD system. Up here on the window here, it says RFD number 2. RFD was rural free delivery. That's what they called the mail service back in those days. And it's funny, when people come into our museum, when you will first walk into the barn edition, you see this vehicle. And I've been asked thousands of times, are you going to restore this? And I have to tell people, are you kidding me? This has already been in the shop for about 3-4 weeks. You should have seen it when we got it. This is the only vehicle that we have in our museum that, as it sits on our floor, is not roadworthy today. And it actually, the body is roadworthy, but you can see by the look of the wheels here, you see a few missing spokes and whatever. We had to do a lot of repair work on the fallows. They were really split out. So we wanted to leave this one as original as possible. This has got tin sides on it. It's got an oiled canvas top on it, and some of the curtains on the side. And you can see inside of the coach itself that the canvas mail bags are still there. And when we acquired this was actually used in a little town called Cornelius, about 30 miles west of Portland, Oregon, and we were able to acquire an actual picture of our little buggy back in the turn of the century. Here it is down here with the postman making his delivery. You can see that at one point it also had a boot on the back, which was an oiled canvas boot that they could carry extra mail in, but that has deteriorated, so that's no longer on ours. But this is the same buggy. It's just kind of a really neat picture. Let's see, I'm waiting, there we go. This is our Mitchell wagon. Mitchell and Company, they have kind of an interesting history. Mitchell Wagon Company, the Mitchell Lewis Wagon Company was out of Racine, Wisconsin. They started back in the 1860s, and by 1888, they were making 85 wagons per day. They were one of the larger wagon makers. And while they were making those wagons out here in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon, there was a company called Staver and Walker, and they made various kinds of agricultural equipment and plows out here. And Mitchell's grandson got the West Coast bug, William Henry Mitchell, and he came west and opened an office in Portland, Oregon in 1880. Well, he merged that company with Staver Walker. Walker died, and the Mitchell Lewis Company actually became the Mitchell Lewis Staver Company. Our wagon, this wagon here, was actually purchased in Portland, Oregon. It was made in Racine, Wisconsin, but purchased in Portland, Oregon in 1892 by a local farmer near a town called Battle Rock over near Vancouver, Washington. And it's actually, this is one of the wagons that we did a significant conservation work on, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that down the road here. What we really enjoyed about this wagon is these are the kind of wagons that actually built America. These are the kind of wagons that came across on the Oregon Trail and brought a lot of people out here to the West Coast. This is the little town of South Bend, Washington, which is our next door neighbor, about 3-4 miles from our museum. And you can see all the work wagons lined up here in this building. They call this the transfer building. This picture was taken in the early 1900s. This building still exists, but you can see the planked floors. Our whole area is built on fill dirt because they used to dredge the rivers out here. So it's all built on fill dirt. These are all asphalt now, but this building still exists, and we just thought it was a very neat picture to have along with our Mitchell wagon. Couple of pieces of equipment that these are not the elegant carriages that we're looking at now. This is work-related equipment. This is our running gear that we have. We picked this up off of a farm about 50 miles from where our museum is located, and it's a neat piece of logging history and construction history. The running gears are for all intents and purposes, this is what's underneath most wagons, although this particular one is a little bit larger. You can see the wheels are larger. This is our Mitchell wagon in the background. And the unique thing about this running gear and the ones that they used in the logging industry is on the reach, which is this piece that goes between the axles here. You can notice that there's a pin that's right here in the middle. Well, we can pull that pin out and extend this reach out. And this is how they carried their 30-foot logs and their 30-foot 2x4s and whatever they were making. Same type of running gear is underneath the wagons, although they don't have a slip reach. There's no reason to extend the wheelbase, so it's a permanent reach in there. Yeah, this is just a real neat piece of the logging history that's so evident in our community out here. The bottom one here is our road grader, and our road grader is kind of interesting. This is actually made by the Western Wheeled Scraper Company out of Aurora, Illinois. They made these between about 1877 and 1934, and the first 600 of these actually went to the railroad industry to lay track across the country. We found this in a ranch in Northern California about 5 or 6 years ago. It sat out in the field for about.
Put the blade up and down, turn the blade.
Hello. We actually found this in a ranch in Northern California. It was out in the field for about 50 years, and it was all frozen up. But we got it working. You could actually grade a road with this. We pulled this in parades, but big draft horses out in front, driver sitting up here. There was an operator back here. It has an articulating blade. These wheels.
They weren't on time.
blade. So yeah, really neat piece of historic road equipment.
The nicest vertical.
Jack, I'm gonna break in here. Jack, your microphone is on. Thank you.
All right, I'll keep going here. Outside of our museum, we have some unique pieces as well. This is actually a horse-drawn crop duster. It's the only one that I personally have ever seen. Maybe some of you guys have seen them before, but this was actually, our crop duster was made by the Fresno Agricultural Works, and they made these between 1880 and 1903. What's interesting about this is that the pole out here, this was pulled by two big horses. The pole was actually a little bit longer. It would have come out to about here, but there was some damage to it. We had to modify it a little bit. But the interesting thing is we got all the rest of it working. Operator sat back out here, and in this canister here, they actually put powdered sulfur. And there's a foot pedal here that the driver controlled. And when he pressed on, when he pressed on that, I jumped ahead of here a little bit. Sorry. I'm going there. When he pressed on his foot pedal, this was like a gigantic flour sifter. And on that flour sifter, when he would release some of the powder, it would go into this mechanism here, which is a blower. And there used to be a belt that went from here down to the axle. So when that wheel was turning, it was actually blowing out these tubes here. But I have to kind of laugh at this because back in the day that this would have been used, this operator, they didn't have a lot of the environmental laws that we have today. And I would imagine that the lifespan of this gentleman probably wasn't a real long period of time. He probably had nothing more than a handkerchief around his neck, blowing powdered sulfur all over the place. But it is actually a really interesting piece of history. The other one is our stump puller. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen a stump puller. We just acquired this a few months ago. It was made by the C.D. Edwards Company out of Minnesota. They made these between about 1880 and 1920. They also made some heavy-duty grader equipment and other kinds of tools. But out here in the logging industry, they would pull, after they cut down trees, they had a need to remove the stumps. So they would pull this into the area with horses. This mechanism underneath is called a sled. So they pull this in there and anchor the sled to a big tree. And then this hook right here is actually got a cable that goes around this gear mechanism here. This would be pulled out and put around a stump, and they would hook horses, big draft horses, up to the end of this pole right here. And then as they pulled this in a circle, this would actually spin and pull that stump out of the ground. And I would imagine that that was a pretty dangerous job back in those days, because if one of these cables slipped or broke or whatever, and you happen to be anywhere near it, I would think it would be pretty damaging to you. All right, this is our Springfield chuck wagon. This wagon was actually made in the 1890 period of time. Springfield wagon was out of Springfield, Missouri. Our chuck wagon was, we acquired this from a really neat couple down in Arizona who were members of the American Chuck Wagon Association for many, many years, and they went around the country doing chuck wagon cook-offs. And we have everything on this wagon. We could take this out in the park next door to our museum and cook a full meal on it. But he was most proud of the fact that his wagon used to win for originality at a lot of the contests that they participated in. She was most proud of the fact that her beans won the competition. Everything was cooked in these Dutch ovens out here. So it's really pretty neat. The chuck wagon has kind of an interesting history. It was invented by a guy by the name of Charlie Goodnight, who was a Texas rancher. And right after the Civil War, he invented it, and it didn't really last all that long, about 20 years, or a little less than 20 years, actually. They had a need to get lots of cattle from Texas to the East Coast. So they had the Chisholm Trail, and they used to drive 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle on the Chisholm Trail between Texas and Missouri, where they would then be picked up by trains and taken further east. But Charlie invented the chuck wagon. There were a lot of, his original chuck wagon was actually a Studebaker wagon, and no wagon maker actually made a chuck wagon. The chuck box was made by a carpenter or one of the ranch hands or whatever, but they were put into a lot of different kinds of wagons, Webbers and Springfields and Studebakers, Bain, Peter Shuttler, all kinds of them were used. But Out on the trail, when they're driving 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle for 3 months or whatever, this guy, the cook, he was worshipped out there. He not only cooked your food, but all your bedrolls went into the chuck wagon when you left in the morning. So he was your hotel. He sewed you up if you got hurt out there. He was your entertainment. So this was one man that you treated with a tremendous amount of respect. There was maybe up 7 to 10 cow hands, depending on how big the herd was when they were driving these cattle out there for up to 3 months. And at the end of that 3-month period of time, working 18 hours a day, they might have walked away with $80 or $90. So things, like I said, were a lot different back in those days. We also included for this presentation a picture of a cowhide that hangs under our chuck wagon. This was actually we added this because in the journal magazine, the CAA journal magazine, a couple of months ago on one of their quizzes, they had a question about what is a possum belly. And this is the possum belly right here. This is a cowhide that hangs underneath the chuck wagon between the axles. And the purpose of this, when people come in and see it in our museum, they say, is that where the cook slept? And I say, oh no, you wouldn't want to sleep in there. This was actually, as they were moving across the plains, wood was not always available. And if they saw a piece of wood during the day that they could use in a fire later on, they stopped and picked that and threw it in here. A lot of times wood was not available. They burned buffalo chips and cow chips, dried buffalo chips. So they actually loaded this up with buffalo chips or cow chips as well. But the chuck wagons played an important part of American history.
Jerry, just so you know, we're starting to run short on time.
Okie dokie. I'll get through these. Yep.
Okay.
We're good. Let's see. This is our road coach, oldest piece in the museum. This road coach was actually from London, England. It's from the 1840s. This was part of the original collection. I was doing some maintenance work on this vehicle a few years back, and underneath the front seat discovered that there was a brass tag that was actually painted over multiple times. When we very carefully removed that, and you can see here where it says London Exeter Royal Mail Service. London Exeter was Exeter is about 200 miles from London, and this is one of the coaches that used to run between those towns. This is our Henderson stagecoach. 1888, made in Stockton, California. Used to be used in and around Sacramento, San Francisco, Stockton, in the Northern California area. Out here in, here we go, come on. Taking a little longer than there we go. Out here on the in the south part of Pacific County, we have a beautiful beach that goes for miles and miles. It's one of the longest beaches in the world. You can still drive on it today. But back in the late 19th century, to get from one end of the peninsula to the other, which is about 40 miles, they actually ran a coach service. They used mud coaches, and they ran them along the beach at low tide. And this is a picture in 1895 of the mud coach that went between a town called Ilwaco and Oysterville, about a 40-mile run along the beaches. Interesting enough, because of the tide schedules, you know, the tide changes every day by about an hour. So these coaches ran day and night, depending on when low tide was and where they could get through on the beaches. Yep, here we go. In our museum, when we do tours, we like to show people the correlation between horse-drawn transportation and motorized vehicles. And just very, very quickly, here's our Studebaker buggy again. Here's one of the early Studebaker horseless carriages. You can see the style is almost identical, although this has a small combustion engine in the back and some gears in the back. Instead of having a steering wheel like a modern-day vehicle, it has a steering stick. They call that a tiller. This is our produce cart that's on display in the museum, but you can see the design of this produce cart was later taken into the motorized transportation area, and a lot of delivery type wagons were using that, and they were still using a tiller back in those days to turn the wheels. Here we go. This is our Standard Oil kerosene wagon. We got this out of Oklahoma a few years back. Standard Oil, as most of you know, was founded by Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller back in the day. And they say by 1900, he had 6,000 of these type of tanker trucks running around the eastern part of the country and the Midwest part of the country. They were actually supplied via next to railroads. They called these filling stations down here with above ground tanks where they brought in gasoline, kerosene, and heating oil. And our particular kerosene wagon is actually a small one. This is about a 200-gallon tank, but they made tanks up to about 600 gallons. Ours only carried a single product, but some of the larger ones could carry multiple products. There we go. We get a lot of people that come into our museum and they want to see the stagecoach, which happens to be our Henderson stagecoach that was on Mysteries at the Museum. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that TV series, but Mysteries at the Museum is on the Travel Channel. And a couple of years ago, they used our stagecoach as a backdrop for a story, and we were featured on that. Over 1 million people, we were told, saw the first episode of it. It's been rerun about 20 times since then. But I tell the story of this lovely lady right here. Her name was Mary Fields. They called her Stagecoach Mary. She was the first African-American female to get a U.S. postal route driving a stagecoach. And the interesting thing about Mary is she did that at the age of 60. She got the job because she could hitch a team of horses faster than any 25-year-old guy that she was up against. Mary was noted for carrying a 10-gauge shotgun when she drove her stagecoach, had a 38 strapped to her hip, drank whiskey from a jug, smoked hand-rolled cigars, and could cuss with the best of any sailor. And my favorite story about Mary is that she had a standing offer in Montana that she could knock out any man with one punch, and apparently some guys were stupid enough to take her up on that offer. Oh. There we go. Here we have, as I mentioned, we have several movie carriages. This is just 3 of them. Our stagecoach was used in a movie called Virginia City. We have our famous Gone with the Wind carriage, our Shelburne Landau. Our Sea Spring Victoria was in Little Princess. Our Landaulet was actually in the original Ghost and Mrs. Muir, and our car panel hearse was in a movie with Errol Flynn called Gentleman Jim, about the boxer Jim Corbett. And people actually love hearing about some of those movies, and we have a screen in our museum that plays a loop of those movies. Here's our stagecoach, and this is a picture taken from that movie, Virginia City. You see our stagecoach in the background. Here's a very young Humphrey Bogart. There's Errol Flynn, and this guy looking out the back window here, you might recognize him in later years. That's Alan Hale. He was the skipper in Gilligan's Island. Lots of artifacts in our museum in addition to our carriage collection. We're lucky enough to own several Stroop carriage blankets. Stroop carriage blankets were made between 1860 and about 1927. Eventually, they got sold to the Pendleton Wool Company. Lots of period clothing that's been donated to us over the years. A beautiful amethyst glass collection. And 2 of our most recent acquisitions are these beautiful signs here, Stage Depot and Assay Office. These once were on buildings in Temecula, California. Temecula, California is now a big wine country area, but back in the late 1800s, this was actually a stage stop for the Butterfield Overland stage route that went between San Francisco and St. Louis, and these signs hung on those walls back in those days. So we were lucky enough to get those. We recently restored them and put them up in our barn area. We're almost done here, Kathleen. We do lots of tours at the museum for all different ages. Last year was a bad year because of COVID, but most years we do anywhere from 70 to 100 tours. We do educational tours, school groups, car clubs, church groups, you name it. Some of our staff dress up in period costumes, which makes the tours really fun. We even have some of our tour groups come in and they dress up in period costumes, and we have a lot of fun with those folks. But we absolutely love um, uh, hosting tours at the museum. In our back room, we actually have a one-room classroom where kids can dress up in period clothing. They can actually write on a chalkboard. You'd be surprised most kids today don't know what a chalkboard is. We have a wheelwright and blacksmith display area, and you can even drive our horse, our mechanical horse here, and kids can get a feel for what it's like to drive a wagon. We do, like I said, do lots of tours, big parking lot in front. Car clubs love us. This is a Franklin car club that came by a couple years ago. They had their national meeting out here, Mustang Car Club here. We get a kick out of the Porsche, the Pacific Northwest Porsche Club from the Oregon and Washington area. They come and visit us once every 2 years. We've had 40 or 50 brand new Porsches out in our parking lot, and the biggest kick that they get out of, we'll have 100 people in the museum, and they insist that I pull out one of our carriages. This is their $100,000 Porsche next to our $45 Studebaker.
Okay, I think, whoop, there we go. We're definitely running out of time. So if you can wrap this up in the next minute, that would be lovely.
I will do that real quick. I'm just going to jump through some of these. We're noted for doing some restoration and conservation work. You can see me working on some sleighs here. This one is a adored town sleigh out of the Wisconsin Carriage Company that we recently got. You can see the before and after pictures. Our Mitchell wagon, the next picture, this is a perfect example of our conservation efforts on here. You can see the turquoise, light turquoise color and no orange underneath. We actually went over this with a quadruple-aught steel wool and a toothbrush and cleaned it all and re-oiled it and brought back the original color and pinstriping. I'm still jumping ahead here. Oh, there we go. Just a little roof seat break that we got out in Minnesota that we're working on, and we're recognized throughout the country. Members of CAA, the Stagecoach and Freight Wagon Association, Washington Museum Association, where we do a lot of talks with other museums and history talks. We've been on a variety of TV programs, newspaper articles. We were featured in the Carriage Journal when we restored our Mitchell wagon a couple years ago. And with that said, come visit our Northwest Carriage Museum in beautiful Pacific County, and we would love to host you. And it's my understanding that some of you folks will be down in Thousand Oaks, California come June at one of the CAA seminars. That's just a hop, skip, and a jump from us. Actually, I'm kidding. It's about 1,100 miles from us. But if you have time and drive up the coast, you'll love the scenery. But come up and visit us. And if there's any time for questions, I would be honored to take some of those questions and appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you guys tonight.
Yes, we are going to take some questions. And thank you, Jerry. This is Jerry's first webinar. So fantastic job. And we were getting lots of comments about thank you and lovely to hear the background on the vehicles, etc. So we do have some questions on the hearse. Do you know, are your lamps original?
On the Vienna hearse or the American hearse?
It just says carved hearse.
Okay, well, the carved panel hearse, the Sayre and Scoville hearse, those are original lamps on there, yes. And on the Vienna hearse, the beautiful hand-carved Vienna hearse, the front lamps on there are original. It was missing its back lamps, and the gentleman that we got that from actually picked up some similar looking lamps over in Austria when he was over there. Yep.
And the museum, as I understand it, is open, but you're only allowed so many people. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, kind of. Because of COVID, there are restrictions. We're officially, our state for restaurants and museums, we're at 25% capacity, but that's the bad news. The good news is that our museum, our actual capacity is almost 400 people. And so we can have a lot of people in there. And on normal days, unless we're doing a big tour or something like that, we rarely get that many people in the museum at one time. So for all intents and purposes, we're open.
All right, so there's your answer, Judy. If you decide that you're going to leave New York State and fly to the West Coast, you can definitely go see them. We have quite a few people on here from New York, and they're all excited that you had a Cortland buggy company vehicle.
We
So
we love some of those vehicles, and actually for the CAA members, if you do decide to come out to our museum, I would say if you could call us a few days in advance. I'm not at the museum all the time. We have staff there too, but if I know that somebody who has a real interest in carriages, and I would try to be there for you and walk you through, and we'll have a really fun time.
and you sounded like that your workshop is not on the same premises as the Carriage Museum. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have a big shop here on our property at my home, and that's where I do most of the conservation and restoration work. Yep.
Okay, great. That was one of the questions. And then there was a question about the 40-mile stretches of beach. Were there team changing stations along that, or was it all just one team as they went down the beach?
To my understanding, it was one team that would leave, and between the two areas of Ilwaco, Long Beach, and Oysterville, there were actually some small towns or villages as well. So sometimes they only ran out to those particular villages, so they didn't go the whole 40 miles every time.
Great. We had several people that look like they've been to your museum, and Bill and Lynn said that it was a lovely museum and they worth the trip to across the country. And
oh, great, thank you.
Lots of good comments here. There was a question about how the summer coupe Brougham ended up in Washington. And I was curious as to were most of the vehicles shipped across the country on a train, or did they come across some other way? You know?
Well, originally, like the Mitchell wagons and things, they were shipped out to the West Coast on trains because the train service was already available by the time a lot of people were settling out here. But as far as our summer coupe Brougham, our Brewster carriage, that was actually purchased by I mentioned that we had 21 original carriages. That gentleman actually purchased that at auction, and I believe that auction was in Southern California, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
Yes, I know Martin's used to have one out there. Now, was that the Dennis's that had the original collection? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Gary Dennis, he had the original collection?
Yeah, Gary Dennis, wonderful man. Gary, he had the original collection. He had those kind of in a private pole barn on his property. Gary, we actually lost Gary 2.5 years ago. A wonderful guy. We're still very much in contact with his wife. His son, one of his sons and his daughter-in-laws is the one that originally started the museum, made it a nonprofit and whatever. And then my wife and I got involved with it shortly thereafter, and we've taken over since then. But in fact, one of his sons I just had coffee with 2 mornings ago. They live down in Portland now.
And I may actually, I guess somebody called me earlier today to ask this question, and apparently one of the vehicles, the coach, but I don't know if it was the stagecoach or not, was bought from Mr. Lampton, who was here in, it was at the Randall Ranch, then it was bought from Mr. Lampton, who was here in Lexington, and then it went to Mr. Dennis. Can you verify that?
Yeah, our stagecoach was actually, we've had that now, oh, how long have we had that? Probably 6 or 7 years. And one of Gary's last, he was still a collector, even though he bought that for the museum specifically. And he bought that. I believe he was actually working through Joel Brown when he bought that. And it was purchased back there, I believe, in Kentucky.
Yes. Which is actually, if anyone has been to the Kentucky Horse Park where we're located, Mr. Lampton's farm is about a mile and a half away. And does it still have the hole cut in it? My understanding was that there was a hole cut in it so that they could put the cameras in.
Yeah, actually, right under the driver's seat, and where it's actually missing there used to be a middle bench seat in there. There's a front seat like in any stagecoach and a back seat as well. And then there is a hole under the driver's seat, and the middle bench seat is missing because they used to set a camera up in there. And those famous scenes where in the old Western movies where you're looking over the back of the horses and see the reins and they're running down the trail. That's how they used to film those, between the driver's legs.
So interesting. We don't deal much with movie vehicles in general. And it's quite interesting how they did that. We did have a question about the Royal Mail coach. Was that Mr. Dennis's as well, or did that come to you from a different source?
No, that was part of the original collection. Yeah, and we believe that vehicle is a Holland, and Holland is the maker of that vehicle.
So that probably came through Martin's at one point in time.
I believe so.
Yes. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. It looks like everybody has asked their questions. If you didn't get a question answered, you're welcome to reach out to Jerry at the Northwest Carriage Museum. And they are, of course, on a different time zone. So if you're on the East Coast, remember that they are on the West Coast. But thank you so much, Jerry. We greatly appreciate it. So glad that you were able to join us tonight.
Well, we're glad to be here. Thank you so much. And actually, we do have a beautiful website that has, we were probably only talking about a little more than a third of our collection. So on our website, Northwest Carriage Museum, you can log on to that and see a lot more of our carriages. And like I said, if anyone is planning on coming out here, call the museum a few days in advance and let me know that a CAA member is coming out, and I'll try to give you a personal tour. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Yes. Have a great night, everyone. And just a reminder that our next webinar will be with Dr. Tom Burgess, and he will be covering fitness of the equine, horses, ponies, and minis. So thank you very much, and have a great holiday, or great weekend. We're not on a holiday. We're on a weekend. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.